Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Philip.
Though apparently I'm Luke again.
Okay.
The downside
And
to
Philip's
having the downside to having
Yeah.
the mix first is I don't sort out the names. There we go. I can sort them out on the fly right now.
The mix sounds good though, so it's more important than the names.
What's in a name? We should stop having our names on there.
Names are just rigid designators that, you know, they're not really important.
Yeah, what's in a name? Or maybe we should all use the snap cam and just have our names in the snap cam behind us. Have you seen them? They're actually quite good. I've played around with them a couple of times. It's a little app for your computer, and it essentially gives you almost the effect of having a green screen. I haven't used for any of this setup, but I've played around with it, like putting the Answers in Reason logo behind me and stuff like that. And considering there's a gym behind me right now, I might think about doing it for the main camera. But yeah. So
Having the gym makes you look fit and healthy, though.
Oh, well, yeah, and then having a pint doesn't. Although today I'm actually on proper Guinness. I've been generally drinking the alcohol-free Guinness because I like having a Guinness, and I don't always want to have the alcohol. But I unfortunately failed to put any of the alcohol-free stuff on there, so I'm treating myself tonight with a couple of real Guinnesses. I only have two.
It's winter. You need the stodgy warmth.
Yeah, that's a good excuse. Just like to say hello to everybody. Thank you to those that have listened into the mix. I hope you enjoyed it. To answer your question, Cafe, is it the new intro? It's not really an intro. It's just a warm-up. So we're starting the stream later at the moment, starting at 9, just because getting 2 kids into bed is a bit more difficult than getting 1 kid in. And so I'm doing my best to help out with that. And depending on when I get her into bed, it depends on when I come here. So on Tuesday, I managed to do about 10 minutes before the stream. Today, I got half an hour before the stream. It's hit or miss, but I'd rather push the actual start time back so that we can, actually have a proper conversation without me delaying everybody and, missing the stream.
Also, this used to be the sort of intro anyway. So this is like for the good old people that followed us for a while. It was
yeah.
blast from the past.
Definitely, and actually, it was. When we first started, we tried to have these conversations whilst I mixed, didn't we, Dave?
Yeah.
Even I didn't know about this. So.
Yeah, no, that was fun, but it was bloody difficult to actually have a mix and hold the conversation and get all the levels right and everything. Like the first couple of sci-fi videos were like that, and then after a while it was like, no, do you know what? This isn't really working.
When we actually had people start coming into the chat, it was an impossible task.
Yeah, because you then have to respond to them whilst you're trying to have a mix, plus having the conversation with Dave. My brain does that naturally anyway. I didn't need anything else doing it. Alan says he enjoyed it and it makes him want to go to a rave. Thank you, Alan. Going raving. That's a blast from the past as well. Been a long time. I don't think I'll ever go to a rave again. I'm too old for that shit. Who needs a rave when you can just, play in your garage? I guess this is, that's all I need, man. Apparently, Icarus also had a discussion on if Buddhism is a religion or not. Yeah, I assume you're on the side that it was, Icarus. Although there are some people that do seem to have this weird thing that for it to be a religion, it has to have a belief in a god. And seeing as Buddhism is generally atheistic, they say it's not a religion. But then there are also other atheistic religions like the Satanic Temple and Church of Satan and things like that. So there's more to a religion than just a belief in God. Although, yes, generally, gods are at the center of a religion. They can be very different from each other, but yeah, as you say, Icarus, you shouldn't get into semantic arguments on Twitter. Luke, what's my DJ name? Right. So I used to produce and DJ under Wizard Sleeve. And then there was that guy who actually brought out a track under the name Wizard Sleeve with Sydney Sampson, like 10 years after I'd started writing with this name, man. And so I then changed it to DJ Wizard Sleeve because I'm that original. But I do like some of the suggestions that you came up with in the chat. They're pretty funny.
DJ Skeptics is great.
Yeah. That was the best of them all, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, the Skeptics is great.
Do my best Luke impression.
All of psychology is pseudoscience.
That's evil, Luke. Well, did you see this? Did you see this? That was your card.
That was
terrible, I know, but that was my best Luke impression.
I couldn't tell it was a camera trick at all.
Oh, you think alcohol-free Guinness is an abomination? Well, I mean, I don't necessarily want to have a drink every night, but I like having a drink every night. So it's a way to have a drink without having a drink, if you get what I mean. Okay. I am going to get on with the actual stream now, and I'll get back to the chat in a minute. I'm also having a little bit of trouble with the studio scene, so let me just go out and in again on those. Right, so tonight's stream, as you might have guessed from the title, is about critical thinking and echo chambers. Echo chambers. Echo chambers. Echo chambers. Good effect, that, isn't it?
Yeah. That was pretty good.
So I think we should start with a basic overview again, like we did in the last stream, of what critical thinking is. Now, just to put a disclaimer there, what we're doing right now is not a tutorial on critical thinking. So if you're coming into this stream expecting a massive overview and an in-depth breakdown of all the aspects of critical thinking, I do apologize, you are going to be disappointed. But we are going to go over it briefly and then talk a bit more about echo chambers. So Dave, would you like to give us an overview of critical thinking?
Okay. Essentially, it's a means of looking at questions, statements, like looking at the meaning, bringing out the correct questions, and using a particular style of looking at it all. So looking at where the information comes from, how you came across it, why you think it's true, what makes it true, and then using that to sort of in a virtuous way and making it become a disposition with how you approach all your problems that come across in a really brief, sloppy overview.
And what do you think for the key quality, if there was one quality within critical thinking that you think should be focused on first, what would you say that was?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure I have actually a ready answer to that, because there are many environmental things that you can do, like the way sort of you put yourself towards what you find out about the world, like sort of attitudes that you have to incoming information, and then there's sort of internal things about how you process the information that gets in. And I think on both facets, there are interesting things that you can do to sort of be a better critical thinker, I guess, right? Like sort of an internal thing would be, have good inferences, whether deductive or inductive or stuff like that, learn about these. Like, I think that's going to help you a lot if you want to be better at reasoning in general. And then, sort of like, I think what we're going to talk about today mostly is going to be sort of these external things, how the attitude that you're going to have when it comes to sort of external things, and how you gather that information and stuff. And I think echo chambers and these types of phenomena.
Would you say that these internal qualities that would actually help you process the external ones anyway, though?
Oh yeah, I do think that, but I think there is a distinction there about just collecting the information, how you set yourself up to sort of collect information, and then how you sort of internally reason about the information that you collect, essentially. So I
reliable
think
belief
that's
formation.
Yeah, exactly, something like that.
So, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So with critical thinking, do either of you have a particular process that you have when you hear new information or something maybe you've heard before but said in a different way?
Depends on the information, really. But generally, it depends on the source it's coming from, how qualified that person is, how reliable that source is. And I'll usually look into it a little bit more and make sure that these are reliable sources and reliable information.
Do you think that there's any sources that you should basically just discount off the bat?
Breitbart. Fox News. I mean, you're sort of making a genetic fallacy, obviously, but from the probability of how often they've been right, I think it's a pretty valid genetic fallacy.
Yeah, so you would say there are times that there are some sources that perhaps can be looked at with a lower probability of being correct, and therefore maybe not waste as much time looking into it. Maybe not discount it completely, but if you hear something from source A, maybe just go, well, is it in source B, rather than spending more time with the source A information.
Yeah. And some sources, from experience, are kind of biased and are pushing a narrative rather than trying to push forth good information. So,
is it fair to say that most sources have some form of bias?
Yeah, but the good sources might be slightly biased, but have an ability to sort of keep it in check.
That's fair.
Like, if you look at analytic philosophy, everything's so spelled out that even the biases are kind of spelled out, but the arguments can still be good depending on the logic that it goes through.
Yeah, I mean, that you could even say the same about a number of our articles. We try and lay everything out there and go, here's the arguments for and against, and this is why I reject this, and this is why I find this is strong. And you'd say that there's a bias, but we've tried to be as level as we can be. But
yeah,
there is a bias to everyone and everything, I guess, unless you're a complete blank template, and then you haven't formed your biases yet.
I mean, you could argue that like anything that's trying to prove something correct is automatically biased because they're biased towards the conclusion that they have and trying to prove that conclusion.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a really, really basic overview of critical thinking and a little bit on bias. How do you think people can apply critical thought to recognize their own bias?
Okay, that's kind of tough. Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at something and you easily accept it, you could question why you've just easily accepted that. Is it because it sounds good or sounds true? Because it fits in with what you want or what you want to be true? Or does it match up with a bunch of the other stuff that you've already learned that you know is correct?
So, I mean, that's a really good point. If anyone out there ever accepts something really quickly, why did you accept it quickly? You know, and as you say, is it the source? There are two different people can tell me the same piece of information, but I will instantly think more of one person than the other and accept that person more readily. Might be less skeptical of them, and I might just happen to accept this person, and that could be an error. And actually, so what I should then do is go take a step back and go, right, so whilst I do have a bias towards this person and the information they give, are they qualified in this area? And ask those sorts of follow-up questions and think, could they be someone I should trust in this instance?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think getting into the habits, as Dave said, of just, having this like brain trigger automatically whenever you accept something that goes off, and you ask yourself like every time, why you accepted this is a good exercise, because then you sort of learn a lot about why you actually accepted that. And then you learn also, how many times you actually accept things because, as Dave mentioned, maybe it sounds good, maybe it's because, it comes from people that you sympathize with and stuff like that. And that is generally a good way to find out about things. And of course, you also have to have like sort of a reference point as to, what should be good ways or what should be good reasons to accept things or not. Because if you don't have that reference point, then it's going to look all the same to you. But if you learn that separate thing, about when you should trust things and when you should accept things and when not, and then you sort of introduce this habit into your, sort of thinking pattern, then you're gonna be able to compare, I guess, and figure out if it matches or not.
Yeah, no, that's really
absolutely.
good. Luke brings up something, and he says, many biases are unconscious and come into our minds as automatic thoughts. In order to address our biases, we need to be mindful of our automatic thoughts, which is like you were saying there. And if you actually start to build that habit of, that instant acceptance, and you go, oh, why did I accept that? Oh, constantly checking yourself. I suppose they even try to teach that when you're doing exams at school, isn't it? Check your work. And
yeah,
when you're not doing an exam, when you're accepting something, your work is done in your head. So check your work, check your thinking is basically what I'm saying.
I mean, one thing I could recommend for a lot of people is to read Descartes' Meditations and read up on his evil demon argument and his foundationalism. I don't accept the argument, but there's a good methodology in there for breaking all your thinking down and looking at where you've got the information, where it comes from, why you've accepted it, why you think it's true.
Yeah. So Descartes' Meditations aren't going to be a particularly easy read for most people, though, are they, to start them off?
It actually kind of is.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, I've not read it.
As long as you're not trying to read it in French and you don't speak French.
Fair. No, I expected it to be a little bit complex. For the
Some
average
of it
person.
can be. But that actual evil demon argument is pretty straightforward and pretty simple.
Yeah.
And you can grasp the ideas. I mean, I did in my first year, so anybody can do it, really.
And that was... we covered that off in our Cartesian Scepticism episode, didn't we? Yeah.
We did.
Yeah. So go and check that one out if you're interested in that a little bit more. That's just one aspect of that book.
Yeah.
You've got a comment from Alan. He's still waiting for you to respond to the Moral Truth Makers argument on Facebook.
I know. I'm trying to get round to it. But, writing a script for a video and all that.
Yeah.
I will get round to it. It's just a long article. I mean, that's the kind of length that I used to write for assignments.
Yeah. No, I agree. Also, hello, Brina. Nice to have you here with us.
Hey, Brina.
So, is there anything else? I mean, as I said, we're only doing a brief overview of critical thought, and we've probably done longer than I expected us to actually cover off on it. Is there anything else you want to say before we move on to echo chambers?
No, because we can sort of come back to all that later, because that's what the focus is, on how to kind of check that you're not just repeating an echo using critical thinking.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So, Philip, how would you define an echo chamber?
Oh, so I guess the best, I don't have a definition ready in my mind, but I think I can describe it quite well. It's when you sort of essentially surround yourself with information and with sources of information that provide you with information that sort of reinforces your beliefs without the possibility of you getting to see the sort of external side of things and sort of information that might contradict that. So you essentially lock yourself into this this state where you just receive information that sort of grows your beliefs, the beliefs that you already have, and you don't get to see anything that sort of would maybe contradict it.
Perfect.
And we'd say, for most atheists online, the first sort of experience of the echo chamber that we really noticed might be that in, say, fundamentalist Christians, that we notice in others. Would you agree?
Oh yeah.
And we'd take the stance that obviously they're only listening to each other. They're listening to their religious leaders. They're getting all their information from the Bible. They will be looking for information, like they'll accept science if it matches the Bible, but if it doesn't, they throw it out. It's the science that's wrong because the Bible can't be wrong. And it's basically a massive sort of confirmation bias, and they will all be patting each other on the back for saying the certain, catchphrases, and all having the same information. And you might even find, if someone in that chamber says something like, oh, well, this bit doesn't sound right, they might get shunned and othered. So echo chambers are quite tribalistic in their nature.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not actually the main focus of the echo chambers that we're going to be discussing tonight. We're sort of going to be looking inwards at ourselves as atheists. I think it's fair to say that everybody ends up in some form of echo chamber and has been in echo chambers all throughout their life. I mean, if you follow a particular sports team, should we say, any sport, all the fans of that team will all be a form of echo chamber. It's not the kind we're talking about tonight, but they're all sort of cheering each other on. Our team's the best. We're going to do this. And you're all backing each other up, and, But as
a couple of other good examples are QAnon and the anti-vax.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think the anti-vax one is possibly one of the most frustrating ones as well. Or I suppose any form of conspiracy theorist that operates on this complete confirmation bias, and any information that contests the bias is just instantly thought of as wrong.
Yeah.
So, do you want to take us away, Dave, with the main topic of the night?
Okay. Well, there exists within the atheist community a lot of bad ideas that just get propagated. And it's sort of what kind of inspired the video coming up. In that there was a lot of arguments like, I don't believe evolution, I accept it as a fact. And you get yelled down if you turn around and say, well, look, that's not, you're describing a belief here. So, or the atheism is just a lack of belief in God and that's it. If you go against that, you'll generally get blocked or shouted down. Some other ones you can't prove a negative, one that Philip might appreciate. You can tell by the face.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's a popular one, both for atheists and theists, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they sort of get self-affirmed. Like, it's spread by people who have come to that information from somebody else, that has come to that information from somebody else. And because it's a popular saying, people generally tend to accept it as true.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've noticed that, especially in forums and on social media like Twitter. There are these popular catchphrases that seem to go round, and there's a lot of patting on the back that seems to go
For
along
using
with it. Yeah, the catchphrases, the memes, and all of that, and there's a lot of patting on the back and a lot of projection about other people's idiocy if you don't accept the catchphrase as being the truth.
Yeah, and it's sort of propagated. I know atheists like to say that they have no leaders, but there are popular figures within the atheist community that do YouTube videos that repeat those same catchphrases. And that helps to reinforce that bad idea as well, because these people are looked up to. It's like, well, this person's really smart. He's got a YouTube channel. He's an atheist. Therefore, he must know what he's talking about. And there's an element of Dunning-Kruger that goes on here. And this is another popular catchphrase that goes around the atheist community. The Dunning-Kruger is when you're too stupid to know how stupid you are.
Which isn't what the Dunning-Kruger effect is.
No, it's not. I mean, even if you sort of take the meaning that it's trying to present, it still doesn't reduce down to what the Dunning-Kruger effect actually is.
Just gonna grab an image of it. I should have, if I'd known that we were going to be discussing it tonight, I'd have got the handy little chart. I actually, a few years ago, I was trying to explain to my wife about anti-vaxxers and people who, not just anti-vaxxers, but anything that was along that sort of line. People who are so sure in their positions. And I drew it on the chalkboard that we had at the time, trying to explain exactly what's going on. But if I chuck this up on the screen, is it going to come up? It's not going to come up, is it?
Do you need to swap the screen that's showing?
I probably do. Hang on. Oh, bugger. There it is. So
You've broken it.
I broke it. I am going to quickly put us in Be Right Back so we can have a quick share of the graph. 1 second.
He doesn't want you to see the porn that he's got played.
So you should be able to see that graph now. And that's basically the Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it?
It is.
It can be written in a number of different ways. It can be represented slightly differently, but essentially, you've got your confidence and your competence, or along the bottom, it could be replaced with your actual knowledge as well. So if you are, say, less knowledgeable, you might be more confident in the same way as if you're less competent. I'd say knowledge when you're at the low bit is probably a better way to put it, because when you don't know much, you don't know how much you don't know. And that's why a lot of people sit around this bit, and it's this first peak. And as soon as you realize there's more information, you end up getting less and less confident in your position. You start looking into this and finding a wealth of facts. And you end up thinking, oh, well, you know nothing. but you're far more competent and knowledgeable than you were when you were really confident. And the thing is, one bit I like about this graph is you never reach that peak confidence again, because you're always worried that there's still that extra bit of information that you don't know. The only downside, though, is that this lack of confidence, especially if you're anywhere around this bit where you're really competent, really knowledgeable, but you don't have the same level of confidence up here, it can have a really, really negative effect on interactions, can't it, Dave?
It can, yeah. Because one of the reasons, and me and Philip were discussing this just before we went live, one of the things that will make people think you are smart is your use of language. So the kind of technical terms you can throw in there, although there is an inverse to that I'll discuss in a minute, but also the confidence levels that the person giving you the information has. So if I say to you, well, there's this, but maybe there's a bit more to it, the person that you're speaking to who doesn't know anything might go, well, he doesn't know it all. Whereas this guy over here saying, nope, it's this and that's it, really confidently, you're more likely to go, oh, well, maybe he knows what he's talking about because he seems to know everything about it, even though that person knows nothing. He's just said it very confidently.
Yeah, exactly. Just going to switch it back into Be Right Back and get out of this page. And we're back. There we go. That was nice and quick.
It was.
You're getting good.
Yes. And with the technical terms thing, there's an inverse to that as well. Because if you throw in just enough terms to sound like you know what you're talking about, and the person you're speaking to can kind of grasp them from context, they're willing to listen to you. Whereas if you put in too many technical terms and you know what you're talking about, the person you're speaking to might come out and say, well, that's just word salad. Not because what you've said is wrong, but because they don't understand it. And because they don't understand it and they're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect, they think what you've just said is a bunch of gibberish.
We've had that happen to us a few times before, actually, haven't we?
Yeah.
It's one of those unfortunate things, like there's this technical language and you try and break it down, but if you break it down into the simple language, well, you obviously don't sound intelligent enough, and you use the technical terms, well, they don't know the technical terms, so it's word salad.
Yeah, it happens all the time, unfortunately. And a little bit of critical thinking can help people overcome that sort of, well, that's just gibberish, because if you think about it critically, you'll go, well, that's a lot of terms. Maybe I should look into what the terms mean, and then find out that this person actually does know what they're talking about.
Yeah. To be fair, I do think that you should always be the way to use technical language, in my opinion, and this is just my take. I don't know if you guys agree, but I don't think you should use. I think you should use technical language if you're willing to explain to someone what the things that you're saying mean if he asks to, right? And you're willing to actually go in depth about what these things mean, because otherwise it can just feel like you're just, actually it probably feels anyway, right? But it can have this nasty effect of being completely inaccessible to a certain audience if not willing to go down that path. And it is like that when I see it. And then as a bonus, if you're actually asking someone to explain what this means, then you're going to quickly realize if they actually know what they're talking about or not. Usually, because if they're able to distill it and explain it to you, then probably they're going to be able to they actually know what they're talking about, and that's not always the case in the opposite sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
You actually had a good example about epistemology, didn't you, Dave? I'm not
which
talking
one?
The knowledge and beliefs one. I'm not discussing epistemology. I'm talking about knowledge and beliefs.
I've had that said to me. When I was saying, well, look, you need to learn a bit of basic epistemology to understand this stuff. And the person said to me, well, I'm not talking about epistemology. I'm talking about beliefs and knowledge. So, yeah, it can have a kind of inverse effect because the people might have an idea of what a word means and it's wrong. And when you use it, you're situated in two different sort of what Wittgenstein would call a language game. You're playing two different games and using two different rules and miscommunicating.
I think in that instance,
there actually was.
Sorry, I think people need to learn to just say, what do you mean by this word? You know, what do you mean by this term? Because it happens quite often that you see people getting into these semantic arguments, and it happens to us too, where we go, that, you know, that's not what that means, or it means this. But actually, all of that could be generally taken a different way by going, well, what do you mean by this? And sometimes they go, well, they should go, well, I don't really know. So, or, you know, and you can move the conversation on that way and have that explanation, and, you know.
I think sometimes people do try to use this language, sort of overly flavored language. Like maybe, like, I'll admit that sometimes it might even happen to me sometimes when I feel like I know a term and I sort of want to test waters or something like that, you know, to see if I actually grasp it. It's a good exercise to try to understand if it works in this context, and you get feedback. So like sometimes you have to also like discern whether it's like sort of like the intent behind using that, you know, if it's like what the intention was, you know, if it's just sort of to I don't know, flex or something, because like it happens to some people. Like the other day, there was like Dave Rubin, I believe, that said something like, you know, he used Occam's razor or something like that. He was, oh, that's just Occam's razor, and then he explained it, of course, because and said that means that it's I think that when everything goes wrong or something like that.
He used the term Occam's razor, but explained Murphy's law.
Exactly, and that was just, you know, hilarious to see, because like I don't even know why he felt the need to explain it if he I don't know. But anyway, you can see why people are getting skeptical when someone tries to sound smart, and then you know, you have this show of you know, people sometimes just say things to be like sound impressive and stuff. So it's legitimate sometimes to question these types of things.
Well, you see that with people playing fallacy bingo. The number of times someone calls out a fallacy and you go, what's your understanding of this fallacy? And that's one I've been trying to do more often, rather than just going, that's not what that fallacy is. I go, what do you understand from this fallacy? And so often you find that they don't understand what that fallacy actually is.
Begging the question.
Yeah, that's happened a lot recently, hasn't it?
Yeah. It has quite a bit. Yeah, that was a thing.
Yeah, I find straw man is one that gets thrown around a lot. Generally, people use straw man to mean like a weak or nonsense argument, and that's not what a straw man argument is. No. And it's kind of frustrating to go down these things, especially when most of the time I notice the fallacies are thrown about by us atheists. And I find that the most frustrating thing, because obviously I am part of this group, whether I want to be or not, by my particular belief position. I am attributed to them, and the fact that I do spend time online having these sorts of conversations only further pushes me into that camp, even though I am trying to contest a lot of what the other atheists say. It's still Luke's actually coming with the... Sorry, do you want to go ahead first?
I was just going to say that straw man thing. There's another one like that as well, where they use that's not logically valid to mean I just don't accept the argument.
That happens all the time.
And that's the result of being in the atheist echo chamber and repeating things that you've heard and taken on faith, even though, you know, atheists don't take anything on faith. But it's the result of repeating these things without actually checking to see whether they mean what they think they mean.
Yeah, I think this is even worse in sometimes in atheist circles, because there's this culture in online atheism of debunking things, you know, and sort of fallacy language is very prevalent in those sorts of videos very often. So then people just see it used there and maybe misunderstand it. Sometimes even in the videos, it's not entirely accurately presented, or some things are missing, and then they just go out and use it again. Or maybe at best go to what is this fallacy, or I don't know, what .com or the website, and then read once up on it, and then just use it like that. But it's like sometimes there's more to the conversation around fallacies than people realize. And
yeah.
I think the better way to go about it, if you notice someone committing a fallacy, is to try and make them realize that they've got an error in their reasoning, and sort of draw the lines and go, don't you see a sort of a gap here, or do you realize that this isn't exactly what that person said, or just try and phrase it in a way that helps them realize that there is an error in reasoning.
Yeah.
And obviously, if they still don't listen, then okay, well, I understand getting to the point where you've had enough of the conversation. There's your fallacy, but it should not be the first port of call.
I mean, I rarely ever throw out like, oh, that's such and such a fallacy. I try to explain the error in reasoning because it's clearer and it's easier for the person you're speaking to, and it helps them to understand the error in their reasoning a little bit more. And my view for a lot of online atheists is that until they can actually explain the error in reasoning and why that person has the error in reasoning, they should stop using the fallacies.
Exactly. Yeah. Because otherwise it's just an empty shell, right? Like it doesn't mean anything if you say stuff that you don't understand what it means.
Exactly.
It's like taking the definition of atheism to one so broad it loses all meaning.
Yeah. And I mean, like some of the ones I posted the other day, somebody said theism is a straw man of itself. Which is like, well, so what you're saying is A does not equal A? Something can't be a straw man of itself. So if you're throwing out those kind of remarks, then you obviously do not understand what these terms mean.
Yeah, I've had similar ones where I've just been having a conversation, and this person shared an anecdote with me. I shared an anecdote back, and they went, "That's a straw man." I'm like, "Well, we're not having an argument. You've just told me your experience. I've just told you mine. You could, if you want, say that I've committed an anecdotal fallacy, but I've been clear with the fact that this is my experience, and you've given me your experience." And the person blocked me.
Yeah, that's a bad habit in the atheist community. Hence the echo chamber thing that I'm talking about.
So a few comments in the chat before we continue. Luke's got a comment on. It says, to be fair to Jordan Peterson, that does happen to him. He's talking about the language bit. He uses unnecessarily long words, which means people think he's talking gibberish. But he actually does make sense, even though he's wrong.
Yeah.
So it's not word salad. He's just wrong. And the same happens with Russell Brand. And that's true, actually. He talks a hell of a lot of nonsense as well, though. Russell Brand does go into the realms of word salad with long words. Half the time he's making sense, and half the time he's just trying to sound clever.
I don't really watch him.
Yeah, I think I know who he is, but I didn't watch.
I'm surprised he's as popular as he is. I don't know how he got to be as popular as he did, but
the only thing I really remember about him is he hassled Jasper Carrot's daughter or something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I could be wrong in which comedian it was, but he hassled some comedian's daughter who had to have a restraining order put on him or something.
I mean, he's a bit of a sex pest, though, isn't he? So.
Yeah.
Kimmo says, imprecise speech is frequently an indicator of imprecise thought. I would lean to agree with you there, although I will say sometimes you don't necessarily have the precise terminology. There are times you're trying to describe something, or sometimes, a few words have jumped out of your brain. The number of times I'm trying to describe something, and part of it, the only word I've got in my head is this thing, and I know exactly what I'm thinking of. I can picture it, but there's this block in my head trying to do it. So there might be a bit of imprecise thought going about some specificity, but it's not necessarily to discount people for using terms that are a little bit imprecise. Sometimes they just need a little bit of help.
Yeah, but I think it's also like depending on how used to are talking about certain things, you're going to see that you naturally grow language that is more precise the more you think about a certain subject, right? Because like language is often just a shortcut, right? Like you have to have, at some points it just becomes easier to talk about terminology and use terminology if it has like more specific references than what you usually would use. Like I think a good example of this would be with snow. I don't know exactly if this is true actually, but I've heard that sort of like in Eskimo languages, you have like a lot more terms to describe, the type of snow that is around, because naturally that happens when you live in a place where, snow is quite important to understand, and it snows a lot. So of course you have more terms to describe that.
Think about rain. I mean, in England, we've got so many different types of rain that we have. We might be talking about drizzle, a downpour, and so on and so forth. We can think of a number of different terminologies that are all talking about rain. At the end of the day, it's raining. We're just talking about a specific type of rain. And we don't have to say the word rain for it to be understood that we're talking about rain. But you could probably go somewhere where it very rarely rains and they wouldn't have a clue what you were talking about, even if they could speak English.
Come to Wales. There's like 40 different words for rain.
But that's what I mean, that like when you see, like a lot of the times, and this happens a ton, and you mentioned it already, right? Like that people are just going to go, oh, this is word salad, right? Because there are many terms that are sort of like detailed and maybe not common and stuff, but that's just, that's a cheap accusation, and it's not, you should think about that before saying it, I think, because sometimes it's just an expression of someone that actually does think about the subject a lot and therefore has, a more refined, I guess, tool set to talk about these concepts.
Yeah, I think the people who've been having the conversations for years as well, who still have very imprecise terminology, that is an indicator that they're not someone that has particularly precise thought, especially. There's that person that used to, I muted in the end, I don't know if you did as well, Dave, but every thread or every conversation we had, they started meme bombing.
I can't remember who that was now.
I can remember the name, but there's no point in calling them out on air. But they basically meme bombed every conversation. There was one time where I think Intrigued Freeline asked you and I a question, and an agnostic asking two atheists questions about something. I think it was about morality or something like that, and he just started meme bombing that conversation as well.
He told both of us to prove our God.
Yeah.
Of course he did.
Yeah.
But any conversation that you had with him, he didn't even understand, some of the basic theological concepts, and it was just all he had was memes. And he would say that I've been, talking about this for years, and it was just like, really, and this is the best that you've got. So definitely, Kimmo, for someone like that, I definitely agree. But I think that we should try and be charitable in the first instance. And whilst you might say, well, there's an indicator there, but let's find out how much they know first and how long they've been having these conversations. And, imagine your first time having a conversation about morality and someone starts talking about normative ethical theories, and you're just like, objective standards and the difference between absolute and objective and relative and subjective. And then all of a sudden someone's throwing in emotivism, and you're just like, the fuck, man? I just thought it was subjective, but what's all this different subjectiveness, and some of it's not what?
Yeah.
So someone like that could still be capable of having very precise thoughts. They just don't know the terminology involved.
And not everybody looks into every subject. That's something.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's fine, by the way, right? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, it is fine, but then talking like you're an authority on that topic, not so much.
Yeah, especially, don't go and just, accuse people of using word salad, if you're not willing to look into it, right? Like,
or saying they don't know what they're talking about when you've never actually looked into the subject and you've just picked up information from the local echo chamber. Yeah,
exactly. But like nobody demands of you to of everyone to learn everything about science, right? But if a scientist talks, you're not going to be like, oh, that's just word salad BS or something like that because they're using some technical terms at times. So, yeah.
And that's another part of what makes people think somebody else is smart. That's the difference between calling something smart and calling something word salad, is that they respect the scientist but don't respect the other person.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually very true.
Yeah. There's a lot of scientism that seems to go on within the atheist community in our echo chamber. Science is almost deified as this thing that knows all and can tell us all and proves all, and if there's no scientific evidence, then you don't know it, and all the other bad catchphrases that go along those lines.
Kind of like the one I shared the other day, where he said the only useful philosophy these days is the philosophy of science, and that comes from the physics department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they had me in the first half, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Same.
That was pretty much that.
I mean, I wouldn't fully agree that it's the only, but I will
me
say,
neither. But at least the fact that he said philosophy of science was okay. I mean, that's controversial, but at least I kind of. I mean, he seems to be interested in philosophy of science. That's great, right? But then it became clear that he didn't know that the philosophy of science was a thing. So
yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, physics is the philosophy of science.
Yeah.
I wonder if it hurts. It would hurt him to find out that science is essentially applied philosophy.
That's probably one of the reasons why he mistook the physics department for the philosophy of science department, because of things like that. So he's just sort of mixing up terminology and coming up with a sort of bad idea, which even I do occasionally.
Well, it's the only way you learn, I suppose. Well, not the only way. There's plenty of ways to learn. I don't know why I said only way. But making mistakes is a good way to learn, because the second
as long as you learn from them.
Exactly, yeah. And as long as it's not a serious enough one that, you end up dying somehow or something. Can't learn from that one. But other people can. So maybe some people dying is a lesson for others.
Isn't that why we have the Darwin Awards?
Also, Luke, I just wanted to say, you have to be omniscient to know an omniscient being doesn't exist. I don't know if that's an example of Dunning-Kruger. I just think it's a dumb argument. That's pretty much it. Maybe I don't know. To the point, we know who what that is referring to, and I think I can pretty safely say that it has been explained so many times to this individual that I don't know if that's exactly about Dunning-Kruger. I think, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the thing. I mean, we very much disagree with this claim from this person as well. It's been explained to him in a number of different ways. The way I explained it to him was, if you have a number of claims about this omniscient being and they are logically impossible, then that being doesn't exist, at least as it's being described. You can know that this particular claim is false simply by it just being logically impossible. But he didn't accept that. He said, no, you still have to be omniscient. And it's a bit weird. I mean, why would you have to be omniscient to know that an omniscient being doesn't exist? And does he apply that?
It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't make any sense because, I've seen him present the argument in a semi-formal way. It wasn't really formal because it wasn't a valid argument. But it seems to me that the drive at it, the reasoning seems to be that an omniscient being would be able to exist in ways that are not conceivable to us, so we wouldn't be able to conclude anything about it. But that seems to be that's just complete. These two considerations, right? The driving force of the argument is this idea that human beings are limited in knowledge and that we cannot know everything, right? That is what he's using to draw this final conclusion, that because we don't know everything, right, we cannot know if this thing could exist in some other ways that we cannot conceive. But that is completely separate from the fact that what you're talking about is itself omniscient, right? Like these are two completely separable things, right? Like if you're going to use this argument, this could be applied to literally anything that you would want, right? Because it is true for any claim that you make that human beings are limited in knowledge, and so you could apply this level of skepticism to everything. And it doesn't matter if the thing that you're questioning is supposedly self-omniscient or not, and that's like why this argument is absurd in the first place, right? Like you can make an argument from skepticism, right? But then you're going to get into problems with consistency. You know, why some things yes and some other things no, and that's where it's going to be troubling for you.
And funnily enough, that person is also the same person who struggles with the question begging.
Yeah, it's true.
So Luke says, sometimes I begin to use more technical words when somebody is challenging me on something that I know to be right, to show that I know what I'm talking about. And I can understand that, because from there you can go, if they then respond with something that doesn't seem to have anything to do with what you're talking, go, what do you think I meant by this word? And that can sort of open up the conversation and change the direction as well. Also, when you're talking on somewhere like Twitter, if there is a concise term for something, well, you've only got 280 characters, so it's really helpful to have concise terminology. Unfortunately, people want you to have break down these really, really, really complex things into 280 characters or less, which you can't do, but you can give a basic surface sort of idea of something. But that requires you to use, at times, some really technical language to explain the thing. And then, you know, hopefully a person would then look up that technical language you're using, but that's never the way it goes. It goes back into the whole word salad conversation we were having before. He also says, I said in my recent video, if you cannot accurately describe the position of your interlocutor, that the position your interlocutor holds to their satisfaction, you can't attack their position. Yes, well said. I think it's something that people need to practice more and come back at people, go, just to confirm, is this what you're saying with your argument? You know, clarify that. Just, you're not straw manning them if you get it wrong there, because you're asking them the question, are you saying this? And if they say no, but don't give you much more detail, okay, so this to this, A to B, sounds like you're saying C. But if you say you're not saying C, can you explain to me how it's not C and what should it actually be? And yeah, from there, you can then get an accurate representation, and you can even say to them, okay, I'm happy to use your terminology for this. Just so you know, this is how I would describe that position, and we're now talking about the same thing, and go on from there. But again, in a place like Twitter, it's very hard to have those conversations, and everybody is in that sort of fight mentality, and people aren't looking to have a proper conversation, really, are they?
The thing as well is, if you can actually describe their position back to them, sometimes that'll disarm them and make them actually listen to you a bit more.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And that is an extremely good and productive way to have conversations and resolve disagreements, because like so many things, just fail because people do not actually know what the other person is talking about, or don't understand, or missing something, right? So like if you force yourself to always, like from both sides, to repeat back what the other person is saying until this other person agrees with what you're saying, in the sense that you are representing correctly what they are saying, then you're going to ensure that your critique is going to be good based on what they're saying, and you're going to ensure that it actually feels respectful and it feels fair to the other person. So it's like a very good way to to resolve disagreements and in general still to discuss, I think.
Yeah, most definitely. Hi, Tyler. Nice to have you here with us. Hope you're well. And a comment from Kimo saying the fact that consciousness is a scientific object of study nowadays has a lot to do with work done concerning the philosophy of mind in the 20th century. There's plenty of vibrant philosophical work. Yes, of course there is. I mean, I fully agree with you that, but then, we're going to, seeing as we're mostly a philosophy channel.
I disagree with it, as the paper behind me shows.
Philosophy is useless.
Exactly.
I mean, it's all subjective, isn't it? So. So, I mean, what we've done there is we've obviously highlighted a couple of different sorts of things that come out of echo chambers, and we are mostly talking about the atheistic side of it, but we did mention a theist who was committing the same sorts of fallacies on the other side as well, and obviously is stuck in his own echo chamber. But Dave, do you want us to move on from there?
Well, one more thing to be said before moving on is that everybody suffers from the Dunning-Kruger effect to some degree. Like, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just about being overconfident when you know only a little bit. It goes, like your chart showed, it goes right to the other end. It's a cognitive bias that sort of is in everybody, and it affects how everybody sees their own confidence in what they know. And it's important to remember that all the time, that everybody suffers from the Dunning-Kruger effect and nobody is immune from it. And that's one of the first steps to actually starting to become a good critical thinker.
Recognizing it within yourself and others. And also not projecting that someone doesn't know what they're talking about and is suffering from the Dunning-Kruger because they're presenting a different argument to you. I think I was having a conversation a couple of days ago on Twitter, and I think it was about epistemology, and it was just discussing. It was probably in that I don't accept. I don't believe evolution. I accept it, but it got on to one about epistemology and the basic definitions and how it's done, and talking about philosophy. And this person just wouldn't accept my argument, and then just turned round and went, "Yeah, you're suffering with the Dunning-Kruger." Really? It's really frustrating in those situations when you know you have a better understanding than that person. Quite often in conversations, especially with a lot of philosophical topics, if someone's more confident than me, I will very, very much step back and go, "Oh, do I know what I'm talking about?" And I'll go off and I'll read something, or I'll try and have a chat with you guys and go, what does this mean? Have I got this right? Am I in the wrong place? But there are certain things, like really basic stuff, like the definition of a belief. When people are going on about, a belief is just accepting something without evidence, or it only applies to religions. That's another one as well. It only applies to the religious. What? And you're just so demonstrably false. I can give you every dictionary definition and a ton of papers, and it's really, really, really basic epistemology. And and then you get told that you're the one suffering with Dunning-Kruger, and you're just like, how many more sources can I give you?
Well, another good example of that is I've heard belief described as things you take on faith. And if they have taken that definition of belief, then they're exhibiting belief because they've heard that from somebody else and taken that on faith.
And then you break down what's faith. Well, it's essentially just trust.
Yeah.
And what's trusting in something? Well, it's sort of believing something. you can turn it back round on them. And then they'll have a different definition of faith. They'll use Ra's definition of faith too. But yes, hey Steen, how you doing? Good to have you, dude. He says he predominantly has the Freddy Krueger effect. Awesome.
I think, like in general, when we talk about these sorts of phenomenons, including sort of echo chambers, but maybe especially echo chambers, is always, like, the biggest problem for me is always figuring out, whether you are in one, and how you recognize, and how to deal with that. Then after, how to deal with that is like, there are certain things that you can do about it, but I think that one of the biggest mistakes is to just assume that you're not, right? Because, like, it always feels great when you talk about echo chambers, right? And you feel like the sort of distance create within yourself, because you're like, oh, I'm talking about echo chambers, I know what the hell I'm talking about, right? Therefore I can't be in one, right? Because I recognize it, and I can say all these things about echo chambers, right? And then you think about creationists and stuff like that, and you say, oh, they are in an echo chamber and stuff like that. But then I think you would be surprised. I think the people, for example, creationists, they do know what echo chambers are, but they just don't recognize that they are actually in one, right? Like, it's always easy to point out where echo chambers are, like, outside of you. It's very hard to figure out exactly where you are in terms of, the overall situation. And just you knowing about these things and talking about these things doesn't make you immune from these things. Like, for example, like we as a community, right? Like me, Dave, Joe, and other people on Twitter, for example, right? We are sort of like people that like to talk about philosophy and stuff, right? And we have certain ideas about what atheism means and stuff like that. And we do, like, follow these people and see when they interact, and then do also, like, engage in these types of practices, right? Like when someone argues against someone that doesn't seem to know, or just thinks that atheism has one definition and stuff like that, then we'll go and agree with him and like him, and then just pat each other on the back as well, to some extent, right? Like, it's a mistake to think that just because you can think about these things, right, that you're immune from these things, right? Like, that doesn't mean that they are not in an echo chamber, because they probably are, but you have to be very careful how you treat these things, because it's very easy to feel like you're a master of these things the moment you start thinking about them. And I think, like, the proper conclusion at some point, if you really start to think about them, is to realize that you actually should be even more careful than you initially thought, and come to this conclusion that you shouldn't just assume that you're out of it.
Absolutely. It's why when people understand fallacies, they start to think, well, because I understand what a fallacy is, I'm not committing them. Or because I know what the Dunning-Kruger is, I don't suffer from it. Because they think, now that they know what it is, it's in their mind and they're hyper-vigilant, but actually they're not vigilant at all. Like, all of us suffer from it, like you say. It's keeping it to a minimum, and that's about, I think, the best we can do.
Well, actually, Philip, you basically just led me on to what I was going to say next, is and follow up with a question as well. It's the fact that essentially you could say right now on this stream that we are quite a tight echo chamber. We're all saying essentially the same thing. We're all agreeing with each other. We've got the people out there who are in the chat right now who are essentially agreeing with what we're saying as well, providing different examples, slightly different perspectives, but all in all, we're all saying the same thing. I think I'm very aware of the relationship that I have with you guys and some of the audience, and I know I have been corrected by you guys, or been sort of think about this in a different way, put a different idea, and I might still end up in the same position. But I know full well that, at least with most of the guys in the chat and you two, that we're not in that same sort of echo chamber where we have, like, this particular pattern that we're all agreeing to. We've got different ideas on things like free will. We might have different takes on morality, and so on and so forth. So I know that we aren't the same sort of echo chamber, but I get that we can appear just like that echo chamber. So the question is, Are echo chambers always a bad thing?
This is a good question, I think.
Students in a classroom echoing what they've just learned and helping each other reinforce what they've learned and understand what they've learned can be a good thing because it helps them understand the material better. As long as there's some disagreement about the interpretation of the material and they're not just repeating everything word for word or things like that, I think they can have a benefit to them. But in general, echo chambers lead to more easily spread misinformation.
Yeah, definitely.
At least that's how I see it.
I think on that front, you can almost see how that's done. I mean, you take to get rid of the conspiracy echo chambers, they're really obvious, but the ones that we notice within the atheist community are going to be things like stuff that comes down from like the ACA or Aaron Ra or anything like that, like the definition of faith and belief, and I don't believe things I know, and all those other catchphrases that are really, really popular. That's the start of some form of misinformation, a lack of understanding of epistemology, and whatever else that has led to these sort of bad takes that have become catchphrases, which are then passed around the echo chamber, and everybody accepts it because, oh well, Ra said it, so it must be true, and I think. How do we fully class an echo chamber? Because I would disagree that the classroom example is necessarily a proper echo chamber, because I think echo chamber actually has that negative weight to it, because it is people who are operating purely on confirmation bias, and I think that we will be in plenty of echo chambers, and I think that we should always be aware that, well, just because Philip and Dave and Luke and Icarus are all agreeing with me, does that mean that I'm right? I need to take a step back. I need to have a look at this. I need to ask some people that tend to disagree with me and try and pull yourself out of that echo chamber mentality, constantly questioning yourself and your peers. But I would see that there is a difference. I can understand how someone might see, say, a certain group as being in an echo chamber. And I can see how people would instantly assume that they are not in an echo chamber as well. And I think that's one massive thing that a lot of us atheists do. Along with a lot of the other catchphrases, we don't commit fallacies, we're not in echo chambers, we don't suffer from Dunning-Kruger, we're smart, we're intelligent. All of those things that are demonstrably not true for every person that's out there. Yeah. So, would we say that there is a split? Would we regard it an echo chamber, even if it has a general net positive? It was a good echo chamber, perhaps scientific consensus. Would you call that an echo chamber?
I don't know. That's quite a tough question. That I'd really have to think on that one properly.
Yeah, I think it truly depends on how you define the thing, right? That seems to me, the key, I guess, to this dispute. For the way I defined it earlier, I think a component of it was, or for the way I seem to explain it earlier, at least, a component of it seemed to be that you're sort of isolated from different opinions and stuff, or the different opinions that you get are always sort of come to you filtered through people who you agree with, right? Maybe through critiques from people that you agree with. I think if you think that is a necessary component of an echo chamber, then all you need to do in order to avoid being in one is make sure that you get information that is sort of arguing the contrary, or various degrees of disagreement, of what you're saying, and that will pretty much guarantee that you're not going to be in an echo chamber if that's the only requirement, or at least if that's one of the requirements to call an echo chamber an echo chamber. So I guess that could be a way that you could solve this, and that would also solve the scientific consensus or the university example, right? Because they're not necessarily isolating you from different opinions, I guess.
Would you say
that is a fair question?
I think with science as well, there's a lot of independent study. I don't think scientist A accepts scientist B, who accepts scientist C, who accepts scientist D. It's not an actual echo chamber. Oh, well, this scientist said it and I like him, so, it's going to be, there's lots of this verifiable information. There's papers, there's studies. I can imagine some do fall into an echo chamber. They have their preferred scientists who they look up to and they just accept, and they almost have this little in-group where they just accept everything they said. But I would say that in general, I don't think science would fit the parameters of an echo chamber.
I think science has developed pretty much one of the best sort of frameworks that we have against filtering out these sorts of mistakes that humans often make, right? I think the way science proceeds and the techniques it uses to confirm or disprove data, I think are among the best that we have in order to figure out what's true. And they are specifically designed to not be to not fall prey of these sorts of very common mistakes that we make. So I think the reason why we should trust science and the reason why we trust scientific consensus is because we trust the process, right? Not necessarily because we trust the people, but because we trust the process, right? Because we trust that the methods that we set up in place are such that they're going to withstand these sorts of defects, if you will, that we have in reasoning. So I think that's why we should trust scientific consensus in general and science in general.
It's an incredibly rigorous form of induction at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And deduction, if you're following Popper.
Yeah, and deduction as well.
Yeah. Outdone, as in Tyler says, you can't really do much about echo chambers because it relies on people to all agree never to be in an echo chamber, and that would be an echo chamber. The echo chamber paradox. It's interesting as well. Then, though, would it be just because you agree on one thing? Would that be an echo chamber? Because there's good justification not to be in an echo chamber, rather than I'm not in an echo chamber because he said, because this person. A part of an echo chamber, to me, seems to be about weak reasoning.
Not just that; it's broader. It's not just an idea, it's a collection of ideas and a collection of sayings and phrases and like for like thinking.
Luke says, scientific consensus ought not to be an echo chamber, but even scientists are practically averse to dissenting concepts. And Steen says there should be enough rivalry in scientific consensus to help with the echo chamber, and I think there very much is in that regard. That's what we were talking about with us trusting the process. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I agree with everything else that's sort of popped up in the chat as I've skimmed over it. So.
Hang on one sec. Just going back to what Philip was saying about science being an excellent method of weeding out these kind of things, a lot of atheists stuck in these echo chambers argue that science is great, falsification is great, etc., etc. And I think if they took that on board, they would be able to leave that echo chamber a little bit more, because they would be trying to prove themselves wrong when they gain new information.
Yeah, but you can't prove a negative, Dave.
Yeah. But again, that's the thing. If they were to go out and look, they would see that there is no actual consensus about this. The only people arguing these things are the people that don't understand logic and things like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's one of the most common ones that pops up. And I think it's one of those things. I think you can't prove a negative comes from a bad take on you can't prove non-existence, which itself is a bad take on you can't prove the non-existence of a metaphysical being that's vaguely described without a doubt. I think we're all on the same page as
you
that
can't
as well.
prove or disprove anything without a doubt. Most things,
Yeah.
Well, it depends how much you trust your senses. I mean, if you don't trust your senses at all, then you'd argue that you can't prove anything at all.
Apart from like some conceptual concepts like square circle, etc.
Yeah.
There's a level of skepticism that could be applied to pretty much everything. Just using the brain in a vat or the evil demon or something like that. You can, don't trust your senses. You can use that level of skepticism for pretty much anything and cause some kind of doubt. It's just, like David Hume says, you're taking it a bit too far when you're doing that.
I think skepticism is very appealing because it's easy to some extent. Right?
Yeah.
I know that this might piss off some people, but I think it's true, right? I think it's very hard. It's very easy to go to extreme levels of skepticism for anything, right? You can run down that path every time as much as you want, right? It's much harder to figure out exactly, what you should trust and why, and how you build up, your worldview and stuff like that. And it's also, in my opinion, quite a bit more interesting. Although skepticism is valuable, I'm not dismissing skepticism, right? I think it's very valuable because grappling with those problems is what is going to give you, presumably, good tools to figure out what is true and what is not, right? But just exploiting that thing about how you can reason to skepticism is sometimes unhelpful, I think.
Yeah.
There's even the common misunderstanding of what skepticism is, though, isn't there? Like the common catchphrase of what skepticism is it's just doubt.
Yeah, or something like skepticism is not believing anything until you've been provided scientific evidence.
Yes,
I've heard that one a lot, which isn't skepticism. And a lot of people mistake sort of like denialism or cynicism, not like the ancient cynics, but cynicism as in, a lot of people mistake skepticism when it's not.
You just cut out there, Dave. That was quite
shit,
funny.
I'm sorry. Yeah, a lot of people mistake denialism and cynicism, like not ancient Greek cynicism, but cynicism as in being cynical of everything, for skepticism, when that's not what it is. Skepticism should be used in a kind of virtue way, where there's a mean that should be followed. If you go too far, it's a vice. Go too far either way, it's a vice.
Yeah. I think you see that a lot in sort of conspiracy theorists type people, when they it's ultra cynical about everything, right? Like, and they'll sort of say stuff like, "Oh, you're so naive to believe these things," right? Like, but that's the kind of thing. But when you hear these types of things, then I think you can safely, I think in most situations at least, assume that there's going to be like you're going to have a hard time arguing with this person sometimes, because it's very easy to be cynical about literally everything, and it's just the cheapest trick in the book, if you will, right? You can be about that for anything you like, right? And it's especially problematic if you then apply the cynicism selectively, right? Because you only apply it sort of one layer deep, right? You go, oh, the first information, the official information that I get is, I take it cynically, but then, for every other information that I get that argues against this, right? And then that I take as gospel, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Because like this other information masquerades itself as sort of like the answer of your cynical views, right? Because it's essentially saying, oh yeah, you're right to be cynical, right? You're correct to be cynical, so take this, right? This is the correct thing. And that's sort of like one of the things I believe that drives a lot of sort of conspiracy theory type beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely.
before we move on, do you mind if we take a quick 2-minute break?
No, of course.
Cool. I'll put it in. Be right back, and I will catch you.
Everyone
on
in chat says pee in a bottle.
Do you know, I used to do that when we were doing the podcasts.
I remember.
Right, I'll catch you guys in a second. Sorry, guys. Hello. Right, sorry about that. Nature called, and I decided whilst I was there to get a drink.
I drink the real drink.
Yeah, it doesn't have cocaine in it anymore. It just doesn't interest me.
I'd probably die if I did cocaine these days.
Yeah, I'm not sure what would happen to me either, if I'm honest.
Hyperactive Joe.
Well,
yeah, no.
you see,
do
one
you know
of the
what?
things.
Well, generally, when I do take, well, back in the past, when I would have amphetamines or stimulants of other descriptions, I'd get really serious and do a line of coke and discuss insurance.
Yeah, same. It always had the opposite effect on me than it did other people. It sort of mellowed me out and made me calm and less hyperactive.
Yeah, unless you mix it with something else. But yeah, it's still incredibly verbose, though. I mean, there were obviously bits which were stimulated, but it wasn't like how some people go like really mad, on them. And I don't mean mad as in crazy. You know what I mean. But it was, a very different form of stimulation. It was really, really focused. I remember one time my friend came around my house. It was the only time I think I've ever done speed, and his uncle had given it to him, and we had a couple of lines of it, and I used to make music, and I wasn't very good. That's why I don't make music anymore. And this track I started making, I'd got a really good sound, and it was it was just really good, and we were both enjoying this track, and we were I was adding bits to it, tweaking it, adding this next section, and I was there, and it got to about sort of 2-3 in the morning, and I looked at the track, and it was 17 minutes long because I had just been so focused on this track. So I was like, right, I need to cut this down. I then spent until 7 a.m. cutting this track down, and it ended up 20 minutes long. Yeah, hyperfocus. I'm never that focused in my life. I mean, I have trouble maintaining conversation with you guys right now, and this is something I'm interested in talking about. Maybe I should be medicated on a daily prescription, obviously.
No, they're never the fun drugs.
Depends what country you're in.
True.
So, apart from our segue, where were we on the echo chambers?
About how everybody suffers from Dunning-Kruger.
No, that's definitely true. We all suffer from Dunning-Kruger, and if we get everybody to agree with that and say that, are they in an echo chamber?
They're just repeating the consensus.
I think, as you guys have said, it's something that's very important to recognize in ourselves and not to instantly accuse other people. In fact, I think it's something that we should all learn, that when someone is sounding a bit crazy or stupid or however it sounds to you, that makes you think that they're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger, to take a step back and go, what do they know about this topic? What do I know about this topic? Why do I think I know a lot about this topic? It goes back to the critical thought, doesn't it? Applying it back to yourself. And I do find, though, sometimes trying to ask those questions isn't well met.
Yeah.
Especially in conversations about some of our favourite topics like morality or epistemology or logic or anything like that. You know, it can be hard to ask what do you actually know about this in a way that doesn't get someone's back up and make the conversation worse. And even when you think, right, no, I've really got how to ask this, there is no way this can offend anyone, and it still does.
Well, if you think about it, part of the identity of those people might be... Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why it's playing up tonight. I'm on full signal strength, full Discord thing. I probably should have rebooted the computer first.
That's fine.
But yeah, a part of it you have to remember is them feeling like they're smart and know a lot might be a part of their identity itself. It might be, I'm super smart because I know these things. So when those things are challenged, their identity is being challenged.
That we see that within the atheist community, actually, don't we? There are certain things that many atheists attribute to atheism: being smart, rational, skeptical, more intelligent than theists, more moral than theists, and so on and so forth. So even in conversations where you get into questions about the definition of atheism, that can be a completely placid conversation even, they get inflamed so quickly because you're suggesting that they don't know everything about the conversation. And that's not necessarily what you're suggesting, it's just what they infer from the conversation. But the fact of the matter is, we're all ignorant about certain things. There is actually nothing wrong with ignorance. There's nothing wrong with not knowing. There's something wrong with being resistant to new information. And how often do we atheists go on and about how new information, evidence will change my mind, so on and so forth. Yet we provide information that isn't popular within the echo chamber, or even known at times within certain people, and it's, no, that's wrong. You're just wrong. You don't know what you're talking about.
Well, a good example is the belief thing. In one of the most recent, I don't believe evolution, I accept it as a fact thing, there was people arguing, well, no, that's not what a belief is. And they were shown the dictionary definition. And instead of saying, oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong, they've gone, well, if you accept that definition, good for you. That's not the definition I use.
Yeah. Yeah, and that almost comes back to a bit of a no man fallacy, doesn't it?
It sort of does. I mean, words do get their meaning from the usage, but if you turn around and say, well, I don't use that definition still exists. And if a certain word became something else used by everybody around the world, apart from in this certain technical sort of paradigm, the popular usage doesn't erase the technical usage. That technical usage still exists, so it still applies to them within that paradigm.
Oh, how funny.
About the building, like, some people do, I agree with you, Dave, that some people feel like, being considered smart and stuff like that is part of their identity and stuff. I think like a very clever solution thing to that actually is to realize that, part of you being smart actually is realizing when you don't know something and try to figure this out, right? Like you being considerate about when you actually know something and be actually sort of kind and try to be charitable about other people's views and try to figure out when you don't know actually things, right? Like part of being smart is making these sorts of observations. So like if then it becomes sort of a self-powering thing, right? Yeah, because then in order for you to keep that as part of your identity, you're going to start engaging in these sorts of good practices, I think, and then maybe
that's brilliant.
Going to be
that's brilliant. I agree. I mean, there's a popular saying, question your beliefs, or however it goes. People should question their beliefs. I sort of agree with that, but I think the wording is wrong. It shouldn't be you should question your beliefs. You should challenge them. Because questioning them could just be, am I wrong? Oh no, all these people say. But if you challenge them, then you go out and you do something like the scientific method where you try and falsify your beliefs. And if they remain unfalsified, then maybe you have something
there. I've just found... Do you know, I was talking about the chalkboard of the Dunning-Kruger Effect.
Yeah.
I've just found that. I'm just going to share it quickly. And switch things up and go. Right. This is what I was... I'd obviously taken a picture of it and it saved to my Google Photos, and I did. Oh yeah, so it was actually in March 2020. So I guess that was around the COVID situation. Me explaining the whole anti-vax thing within the COVID. I thought it was a couple of years ago, but it was last year. But yeah, that was my take on it. But I actually was searching for this image at the time when it popped up. Now this is obviously a number of definitions of belief, and it was trying to talking to people about the definition of belief and showing them, you know, in the various dictionaries how it is defined. It's not these weird versions that they had for themselves. I mean, they had claims in there like belief is only for the religious. That belief is something accepted without evidence. Once you know something, you don't believe it, and you know, so on and so forth. But as you mentioned, Dave, this sort of thing was presented to them, and they still wouldn't accept it. They would have their tiny echo chamber, or massive echo chamber, really, I guess, definition, and not how. I mean, the top left is actually from the SEP paper.
Yeah, I recognize the font and the headline and stuff.
But I'll often say dictionaries aren't necessarily the best way to get the definition of a word that within a certain light. So if you're thinking about theory, if you're having a scientific conversation, the word theory has a different meaning to its colloquial sense. But and if you did happen to look for theory in the dictionary, you'd come up with something like idea. So it's a dictionary can give you multiple uses for a terminology, multiple current usages, and sometimes the context can give you the definition you ought to be using. So I gave 3 dictionaries and a philosophical paper that all say pretty much the same thing there about what a belief is. It's using slightly different words, but essentially accepting something true, concluding something is the case, a positive attitude towards a proposition, an opinion, something that you think is true, so on and so forth. All of these different definitions. I know I've highlighted some in there. The feeling of being correct, trust or confidence in the conclusion, or thing or person. All of these different aspects of belief are essentially saying the same thing. They might have slightly different inferences, and that's why I wrote that article the other day that discusses the difference between accepting belief and believe in, and it acknowledges that we might take different inferences depending on the context, but at the end of the day, they're all saying roughly the same thing. Ironically, it's generally not believed by those who don't accept the general definition of belief. Sorry, I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Oh no, it's good,
no,
because, yeah, and it also gives an opportunity to explain something about critical thinking. In that, if you're presented with this evidence, say you don't accept the word belief and you think that you shouldn't use the word belief, and you're presented with evidence like that, and you still go, no, that's not what a belief is. I don't hold beliefs. You should think about why you're rejecting just such an innocuous word. Like, why do you have so much disdain for that word that you refuse to allow it to describe something that you have? Do you have good reasons for rejecting the truth of it? I mean, what is your reasoning? If your reasoning is somewhat dogmatic or ideological, then maybe you don't have good reason to reject that.
What do you think on it, Philip?
I do agree with that. Like, I think it's sometimes hard to do this with words because, as we discussed earlier, they are usually determined by usage. So it's very hard to be sort of this is the correct definition or something like that. Like there is a lot of
there's a lot of leeway in word usage.
There's a lot of leeway in word usage in general. I don't like. I think it's very hard. It's sometimes it's very prone to question begging. Like any argument that sort of tries to establish one as true is going to be prone to that. At least I find often is prone to that sort of idea. But I do think that at least accepting that such a definition exists or is popular in a particular domain, that is even an empirical claim, right? To some extent.
Yeah.
And that can be absolutely something that is either true or false, and you can sort of like empirically demonstrate it, if you will. And I think a dictionary, in a way, is a good way to do that, right? Especially a technical dictionary that applies to a certain field. That's going to be very good evidence for it being the case. So if you reject even that sort of idea that it is a definition that is being used or used in a particular field or something like that, then all of what you said I would have no issues agreeing with, right? Because then that is effectively being irrational in this sense, right? If you're just rejecting it out of hand. So yeah, and I do think also like I don't know exactly for how many people that this is the case, but I do feel like sometimes these sort of rejection of a very popular definition of belief or inferences, for example, about the historicity of certain figures and stuff like that, those tend to be sometimes motivated by sort of what you want to be, or the rest of your beliefs in a broader sense, right? Like the rest of your skepticism, your beliefs that religions are bullshit and stuff like that, right? So you want to distance yourself as far as possible from that. And so I think that is the sort of thing that you may want to look into as well. Like I think it's a sign of maturity if you realize these sorts of things and try to sort of think about them and maybe even become comfortable again with these sorts of terms, right? Because it shows that you don't have this sort of, I guess, very instinctive scare of these sorts of things that you dislike, right? That you're willing to be very malleable with these sorts of terms. That shows that you're sort of like maybe more fluent and less strict in your thinking. I think that's maybe something that you should try to consider if that is indeed why you're sort of against these terms.
And one of the things that a lot of atheists like to say is that they've broken free from religious thinking. They've broken free from religion being able to control their thought. And yet behaving like that is allowing religion to control how you think and the words that you use.
Yes. That is very much the case, yes.
Yeah, reclaim the word belief, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those one of those many conversations that does end up frustrating. I mean, it's one of the things I say is There's nothing wrong with being careful about your language. And if you choose to use a different word instead of belief, then that's fine. I accept evolution as true. That's fine. Don't say, I don't believe evolution, I accept evolution as true, because you're contradicting yourself. What you're essentially saying is, I don't believe evolution, I believe evolution, or I don't accept evolution as true, I accept evolution as true. That's essentially what you're saying. It's fine to distance yourself from the word because you don't like the connotations it might have, right? That's fine. You want to be more careful and precise with your terminology. That's fine. That is, I think it's positive. I think it shows that you're actually being careful about your wording. And like Kimmo mentioned earlier, someone with imprecise terminology often has imprecise thought, and that's a fair point. And 80-20 rule. You're probably right there, but rejecting terminology is where the problem starts. And I think that's the thing. Fine, don't use belief. But if someone says, well, you realize that's a belief, don't turn around and go, well, no. Yes, but I can justify it because of da-da-da-da-da. And then it's a rational belief. And you can explain why. And there you go.
I'm going to coin the term horseshoe theory of rationality, where you're so busy trying to be rational that you end up irrational, the same as the other side.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
It can be that way though, can't it? It's that aesthetic skepticism, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're so busy trying to appear skeptical, you forget to be skeptical, and therefore end up completely irrational. Yeah.
Like I've said many times, critical thinking and skepticism is more than just a slogan on a T-shirt.
Yeah, no, like this is what we were talking about in the brief sort of pause, right, Dave? Like this is what sort of like sometimes pisses me off as well, like to some extent. This stuff is not easy, right? Like this is really not easy. Like if you want to really be and try to be as critically like be your like a critical thinker and really try to be like a good skeptic and have good sort of thinking patterns and stuff like that, it takes a lot of work, right? Like I would say I'm not even remotely close to any sort of thing that would be close to sort of like what I would ideally want to be like if I were to implement all the things that I even mentioned, maybe, right? Like it's easy to talk about these things, but sometimes it's easier to feel like you are that rather than actually be that, right? Because like only talking about these things makes you feel like, oh yeah, that's maybe enough, right? Because everyone may feel like that you're doing enough, right? Because you're talking about these things and you're thinking about these things, but then actually doing these things is a completely different thing. But I mean, it's not easy. So just in order to like, when people just say, "Oh, I'm a critical thinker because I don't believe that God exists" or stuff like that, right? Then I just that's so not understanding, I think, what this actually all requires you to do. That it's striking to me, honestly. And yeah, I mean, maybe pissing me off is a bit of a harsh term, but I find it a bit weird, maybe, and slightly annoying to some extent.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I kind of feel the same. And generally, if I'm on Twitter and the person who starts a conversation with me has critical thinker or skeptic in their bio, I generally have a rule of thumb that they're neither of those things.
Yeah, that's often, in my experience, too, the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, massively so, unfortunately.
Like Philip said, it's a hard thing to be. It's something that has to become a disposition that you have to put into practice. Like I said to Philip during the break, it's something like virtue ethics, where you have to work on it constantly. You have to have it, maybe not at the forefront of your mind at all times, but generally when you approach something, you have to remember to put it into action. It's a form of knowledge about how you're thinking and how you're accepting claims and looking at things.
Yeah.
So start with the Nicodemean ethics if you want to start to learn to be a good critical thinker, because that teaches you about implementing, looking at virtue, which you can then use those things to put into practice with critical thinking.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it. I mean, I think we've had conversations about morality and virtue ethics quite a lot, and how most things in life should be that sort of balance. Even those things that aren't necessarily virtues should be treated as such, because you can be too extreme one way or the other. I mean, it's my big issue with politics. It's far too left and far too right. Generally, there's a balance to be had in the middle, and sometimes there might be something from the left that makes a hell of a lot of sense, and it is quite left leaning. But occasionally, there might be something from the right that's a bit more right leaning that makes sense. But generally, the balance in the middle is where we should be. But unfortunately, people are too polarized in their thinking. And we've separated into these tribes, and within these tribes we've hit what? Echo chambers. And we
I think
sorry, go for it.
I think I don't know exactly all the time if there is sometimes the risk of running into sort of a middle ground fallacy with these sorts of things, right? Like where you just assume that the middle ground is the correct sort of, or most of the time the correct place to be. And sometimes I don't necessarily think that that's the case all the time. But it is true that politics is very polarizing. I don't know if you noticed, but politics is very polarizing. So I think we could all do a better job at trying to sort of figure this out, right? At least try to be as charitable and try to do the things that we talked about earlier, right? Try to sort of rephrase what they're saying until they agree with it, right? In order not to jump on the first thing that may be off a bit. It's hard. And in talking about echo chambers, right? I think we haven't mentioned this, but I think it's sort of an obvious consideration to make, and I think one that we all know is the case, right? As social media in particular these days is sort of enabling that on a scale that was never possible before.
It makes it much easier.
It makes it so much easier, right? Because you literally can just filter out whatever you don't want, right, to see, and whatever you engage with is going to be surfaced to you more, because that is what the algorithms generally tend to do in order to keep the engagement high. So it's a combination, if you maybe a perfect storm of sorts, where you get all these things combined into one. And to be fair, in the past you maybe talking you couldn't be in an echo chamber even in the past, right? Even without social media, and to some extent you could even argue that it was harder to get out of that because you didn't have access to the data that would let you break out of it. So to an extent, it's good that we have the internet, because now we can we at least have the tools to go out there and maybe try to see the other side. I think
tighter communities, basically. There were tighter communities. Certain parts of wherever around the world would have had these tight knit communities where everybody thought the same, and the entire town was an echo chamber. And as you say, the internet is something that we hoped had broke down those walls, but unfortunately sometimes it's had an inverse effect. Sorry to cut you off there. Please carry on.
No. I think it was a great point. I think, again, there are good sides and bad sides to this, right? On one side, these echo chambers are growing bigger, and they arguably have more strength and power than before, because it's not just a couple of people. It's this entire community of thousands of people is reinforcing your beliefs, and that is just driving your sort of dopamine and all that, and the algorithms are incentivizing that. But to the other extent, right, you at least have the possibility to break out of that, as we said. And I think, again, Stephen Lowe actually, right before we went live, essentially a couple of minutes before, I saw him reply to someone asking, how he can make sure that he's seeing, what the other side is thinking, essentially, right? He said that he once made a Twitter account and followed pretty much all the people that he disagreed with on that account. So basically switching to that account will now, give him a look into the opposing views, right? I think that's a pretty good idea, right? Like I've seen other people suggest this before. There's a pretty good idea, in my opinion. I think there were even apps at some point that did this, right? Like that let you borrow someone else's Twitter account and have a look into someone else's Twitter account. So you could essentially find someone that you completely disagree with, and then sort of jump for a while into their account and then see what they were saying, and then try to sort of maybe you could even start to sympathize, and gain empathy at some point. Then that maybe if you did see all these things surface to you, that maybe you would actually then think the same way as he does, probably. Or at least find maybe better reasons that he thought for certain ideas and stuff like that. So I think these types of experiments are very interesting and might be a good suggestion to try to break out of these types of scenarios. And these are, again, they're only available now, though, because we have the internet and stuff. So that wasn't available to people that were just, where the information came from being in close proximity to the information givers. Like that's not anymore the case. And that's, again, good and bad things with that.
Yeah.
That's great. Actually, I can see the post now. I when you said it, I had to do it, and so okay, just to read it out, just in case anyone is interested. There's someone asks: is there a way of inverting the Twitter algorithm? The views I get from my bubble are fine, but so predictable. I'd really like to know what the other half is thinking. And Stephen Law responds, as you say, I created an alter ego and liked and followed a bunch of stuff I disagreed with. And I go and have a look every now and then. And that's fantastic. That's absolutely brilliant. That's a really great way to do it. Amazing. And thank you for bringing that up, Philip. And thank you, Stephen Law, as always, for being your brilliant self.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is an important part of critical thinking, to be able to empathize with the other person and understand their point of view and see it from their perspective. Because we all have different perspectives on the world. We all have different webs of belief. We all start from different foundations. We all have a sort of different ethics, not mean to say, like it's subjective, but we all have different things that we value more, value less. So understanding the other person's point of view can help us to actually either critique it a little better or understand it a little better.
Yeah, and one thing that might actually help you, because there's always this sort of sensation associated with trying to read views that you dislike, right? Where it's not comfortable. It's like it has like a texture to it that is really uncomfortable, right? But maybe like a way to maybe try to overcome that is just to think about the fact that in a sense you have nothing to fear, right? Like you shouldn't fear any of that, because what's the worst case scenario, right? Like if you read that and the accurate representation of what you're reading and what you think the other side is saying is something that you have good arguments against, and you think that is you can argue against, then guess what? Your position is now strengthened, because you actually confirmed that what you thought about them was true, and that what you thought about the arguments that they were making is probably also true, because you can argue against the best version of what they are essentially proposing. And if it turns out that what they're saying is actually stronger than you thought, and you turn out to be convinced of what they're saying, then that's also like a win in a sense, because now you're closer to what you believe to be true, right? You gained in that interaction something. So either way, it's a win for you. So
yeah,
like maybe that's a way to think about it that might soften a bit that sort of awkward sensation that often comes with these types of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a point and it jumped out of my head just before you finished.
The cap's supposed to keep them in there, make them bounce back.
Yeah, it's clearly overheating. I should take it off and maybe my brain will start working again.
I wouldn't go that far.
No, it hasn't worked for years. I think I'm going bald though. Look at that. I'm definitely going bald.
That's going bald.
Yeah, well, you got a couple more years on me, so.
Yeah.
It's is very much an interesting thing with the echo chambers, and I think what you say about trying to understand the person is a very good, as in the opposition, if you want to view them that way, is a very good way to go. I think it's why, at least from what I understand about the three of us, we often say that we have better conversations with theists than we do our fellow atheists, because the theists we speak to are so used to atheists attacking them that when we turn around and go, oh, that's really interesting, why do you believe that? Can you explain that to me? Cool, I've never thought about it that way. All the barriers are broken down, and they're like, oh, this person isn't a dick. They're actually interested in having a conversation with me. Yet when we speak to the atheist and we say, well, actually, did you know that this can be seen in this way and that way? And when you're, discussing morality, subjective isn't used in the way of from the mind. It's actually used in the sense of based on personal opinion or whatever it is. But it's not the in-group bias. And all of a sudden, they other you and they start arguing with you as if you were the theist. And that's a really, really, really big issue with echo chambers and in groups, is the fact that the second you say something that isn't part of that in group, they don't turn around and listen to you. I say they don't. Some people do. And the people that do are people that we've had great conversations with. I mean, there are people that we listen to that we've had good conversations with, and we still have differences of opinion. But we've had a good difference of opinion. It hasn't been an argument. It's been a discussion. But then maybe that's a big thing that inspires these echo chambers as well. Maybe it's the fight mentality that breeds them. And the second that you say something that doesn't fit within the normal lines of the echo chamber, you are othered. The fight gets turned on you. So some people are afraid to even say anything against the echo chamber.
Yeah. Hans-Georg Muller, I can't remember exactly how to pronounce his name, but he's the German philosopher from Carefree Wandering. He works on something called prophylicity, which is to do with social media and the fact that all of our thoughts and all of the things we think and believe and say, it's no longer like it used to be where you could say them and then they would be distanced from you 5 years later. Now everything's online and everything's visible. And if you belong to a certain group, are you okay, Joe?
Yeah. I just
sure?
coughed. I just coughed.
Oh, okay. Just with you leaning forward and stuff, I thought, and taking the ventilator.
No, I just felt a little bit tight-chested and coughed, and yeah.
Okay, no worries. Just
Thank you for checking, though.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So it's all out there, and you belong to these groups, and these groups give you sort of comfort and like a safe place. But everything you say is visible. So there's a need to keep reinforcing that so that you aren't kicked out of the group. And I think you bring up a good point where you're instantly othered. So people get worried about saying something that goes against that. And because the profile is so open, especially on somewhere like Twitter, where all your tweets are available, on Facebook, there can be stuff that's hidden. So if they say something, then they can immediately be looked upon as an enemy of the state, for want of a better word. So they have to be more careful, and that simply keeps reinforcing these arguments, and it stops anybody from wanting to change their mind because it's out there and the people that they connect with can see it.
Mm.
I mean, I've butchered his argument, but I've tried to boil it down to basically what he said, the basics of it. But it's really worth looking into this idea that he puts forward of prophylicity.
No, interesting.
You'll have to send me a link after the stream to.
Yeah, no worries. He's a brilliant philosopher. He's become one of my favorites recently.
No, definitely be interested in a read myself. But hopefully I'll remember to, when you send that link over, to also put it in the comments or in the notes of the stream. But when I don't, please someone remind me.
No worries.
So is there anything else that you think needs to be brought up about like echo chambers in general?
Not particularly, but I think a little bit more could be said about critical thinking. You know, we've talked about how it has to become this disposition, but one of the best ways to spot it and to start is, like I said, realize everybody suffers from the Dunning-Kruger. When somebody brings up something that you disagree with, think about whether you disagree with it because it's not what everybody else says in the group that you belong to. Stop, think about for a moment where you got this information from, check out the other person's information, check out the other person's credentials, think about why you're rejecting it. Just think a little bit harder when you come across somebody that disagrees with you, and start thinking about the information that you've taken in from your group and whether it's good information and why you've taken it in and why you accept that person as speaking the truth rather than this other person who you've never actually looked into.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's amazing how much bias comes into play. And I understand the reason for biases within our psychology. I mean, if we had to constantly reevaluate absolutely everything, we'd waste a hell of a lot of energy and we'd get nothing done. So I understand why we get these biases in place. But the ad populum is one of the biggest biases that gets in our way, I think. And we sometimes excuse the ad populum when we shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we also say something's an ad populum fallacy when it isn't. And I do think there are times like scientific consensus or historical consensus. I think that's a good ad populum. I don't think it's a fallacious ad populum. But when it comes to in-groups, whether you're taking, well, all of my group think this, so I agree, or all of their group think that, so I disagree, I think that's a very, very, very bad form of ad populum, mixed with a bit of a genetic fallacy if you're doing it from that source.
Yeah.
But how do you get around this? I mean, this is the thing that I struggle with a lot of our conversations. I feel that we understand things, that we make progress, we have some great ideas, and there are times when we can, I reflect on things and I might approach a conversation in a different way in the future. And there are times, and there are certain conversations that are definitely more fruitful on social media from having these sorts of discussions that we have on these streams and applying the learnings to those conversations. But how do you tell an echo chamber that they're in an echo chamber in a way that will make them realize that they are actually in an echo chamber and maybe reevaluate their position?
I think Philip's idea before was brilliant. The idea of understanding that being smart is a part of being smart is checking what you think and checking your sources and checking your information. And I think taking that on board is a good way to start looking at whether you're in an echo chamber or not. Or if going back to the being called theists by atheists, you're saying something I disagree with, therefore you're a theist. I think if you're starting behaviors like that, where you're othering somebody for not, even though they have the same label as you, you're othering them for saying something that doesn't go against what everybody else tells, or that goes against what everybody else tells you, you might be in an echo chamber.
Yeah,
I definitely agree with you, but still, it's so. Would you say if someone is basically operating in this sort of echo chamber, would you then say, would you consider yourself smart? Would you start with that sort of line of questioning? This is what I'm saying. It's like, it's all well and good us having this conversation, hoping that someone watches the video and takes what they say and reconsiders their position. And you know what? One or two people might. You know, they may still disagree with us on the topics that they disagree with us on, but they'll have better reasons for disagreeing with us. And that would be great. And we'll have a good conversation about it. And I look forward to those. But let's just say most people won't check our video or read our articles or listen to other people who are saying the same sort of thing as us, right? The average person won't be, but you'll be stuck in this conversation with someone that's in the echo chamber. And we know for a fact that going Dunning-Kruger, you're in an echo chamber, you're committing a fallacy, so on and so forth, they're not great ways to further a conversation and build rapport. So this person is chanting these popular catchphrases and they're getting cheers from their in-group. They're clearly in an echo chamber, and you see them blocking other people who dare say something different. If you really wanted to reach that person and get them to understand what they're doing, how would you do it?
If I knew that, there'd be no QAnon and anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, that's a very, very hard question, because so much of it depends on the person that you're talking to, right? Like, actually, their attitude and their willingness to do this, right? Like some of these people are probably going to be beyond being reachable to some extent. But that being said, I do think that there are certain techniques, but we've mentioned some of these already. I think, like, trying to be like even more charitable than they probably deserve is a good way to maybe approach them. Because if someone sees that you're being ultra charitable to them, right, like really sort of maybe even surprise them to this extent that you actually do or are saying similar things, and surprise them about how much you actually understand of what they're saying. Hopefully you are actually understanding what they're saying, but if you are maybe, you know, leading with that and trying to be like that is a good way to disarm and sort of try to avoid escalating the conversation into like beyond where it's actually gonna go anywhere. And then maybe, you know, if that sort of primer is working, right, then you can maybe sort of introduce like small bits into the conversation that don't necessarily need to be, oh, here's why I'm wrong, XYZ, right? But like maybe just sort of pointers into or like things to think about. And it will very rarely happen that these sorts of things. It's like with sort of change of opinion, right? In general, it doesn't happen instantly. Usually, it's very rare it happens instantly, right? So the best bet is probably to plant sort of seeds and then see it. And hopefully that will sort of start a thing in of itself in their mind, and maybe make them consider things that they didn't consider before, and then maybe they're going to get out of it. No, because you probably can't drag them out of it by force. Right?
Yeah. You would just make them dig their heels in even more if you tried that.
Exactly. So I think that would be the best advice that I can give, but at the same time, I recognize that this is not going to work for anyone or everyone, not anyone, everyone. But that's pretty much it. I don't think I have more to say on this.
It's one of those things that would be situational, really, and learning to read the situation. And here's another recommendation that's just popped into my head, and that might seem a bit extreme, but looking at cult deprogramming literature. Like how they approach. I mean, I know that they're a bit extreme in that they actually do drag people out of their situation and lock them up for a few days and basically reprogram them. But looking at some of the ways that they deal with conversations about breaking those barriers down might help.
Yeah,
Just don't kidnap people and take them to a motel.
But what you say there is actually something that I find quite interesting, because I find a lot of the atheists that I speak to on Twitter who come from America, especially from southern states, have often been brought up in quite a fundamentalist or evangelical sort of surrounding. And I think that in itself has inspired these sorts of thoughts. You know, they're trapped in that mindset, and even though they're on our side now, they still have all those behaviours ingrained in them from the years of being this fundamentalist. And they can't escape them. They still have that attitude. Like it's almost like the damage is done. And what you say about cult deprogramming, maybe some of that would actually help these people. Though the problem is, I don't think I could necessarily deprogram someone over the internet.
No, nobody could. But there could be some ideas in there for how to approach some of those situations.
So I am going to have to go with option B, Dave, and start kidnapping people who are just...
Have you ever seen Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back?
Yes.
Where at the end they find everybody on the internet who's been talking bad about them, and they fly around the world and beat them up.
I don't remember that bit, actually.
It's right at the end.
I don't remember that bit. I do remember Ben Affleck explaining the internet to them. That was near the beginning. I enjoyed that bit.
Well, they go to movies, and they go on the internet there, and they start finding people talking bad about them. And then they start tracking them down at the very end and beating them up.
Brilliant. I don't remember that bit. It's been a while since I've seen it. Although I do think up until that point, that was the weakest movie. I think I love Jay and Silent Bob as side characters and them having their own movie.
I just found it good, goofy fun.
Yes, definitely. Did you ever watch the cartoon though?
Clark's.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, they've done an actual Jay and Silent Bob cartoon as well.
I think
Ruby
it was
Rama
Clerks,
or something like that. Yeah, Clerks was brilliant.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the Clerks cartoon. God. Yeah, that was one of my favourite cartoons actually back in the day. Luke says, are we talking about NLP? So no, we were talking about cult deprogramming. They might be using NLP as part of it. I don't know because I've not read it. Dave just brought it up. So sorry, Luke, I couldn't tell you. Although your NLP is basic bitch psychology for wannabes. I mean, you like Darren Brown. Darren Brown gets all his shit from NLP. And yeah, so there you go. I guess you're a wannabe.
I mean, going back to what you said about the changing sides but keeping the same behaviors, I think that's a really good point, in that, like, those kind of attitudes are deeply ingrained in how we behave. They're learned behaviors that go back a long way, that have done us well up until then. And that's why I keep arguing that, like, Nietzsche is important when it comes to atheism, his ideas. And deconstruction is one of the most important things for those people coming out of that kind of theism. But generally it's, okay, you're no longer a theist, that's good enough.
Yeah. It's quite disappointing, really, isn't it?
It is. And when you bring up these ideas, you're generally kind of poo-pooed because, well, no, that's not important. It's not believing ridiculous things.
Also, like, I think another thing that to just, make sure that when you try to get someone out of an echo chamber, that you're not actually dragging them into your
into another one.
And that you are in the actual echo chamber, right? Because this is the perspective thing that I was talking about. Like, if from the inside it can very much seem like you're not in the echo chamber, then everyone else is in the echo chamber. Like I could imagine, I don't know, like a flat earther or something, thinking that all these poor other guys are in this NASA echo chamber, stuff like that, right? And then you try to deprogram them, like, they could be discussing these types of things. How do you deprogram someone from their echo chamber, their sort of globe head echo chamber, stuff like that, right? So it's very important to try to figure this out, right? Like, and maybe some of these techniques that we suggested actually do help with this stuff, because we bring it back to, for example, trying to represent arguments that they're making accurately, right? And presumably, if some of these are, or trying to show that you actually understand the argument, not only just the argument, but how it is defended as well, and the best of how it is defended. And it is assumed that good arguments, right, arguments that are going to be truth bound, are going to be much more resilient to sort of critiques, right? So that if you do bring it down to this level, that if someone actually does understand the best version of this argument, it is assumed, or at least hopefully so, that if that is going to be an argument that argues for something that is true, it is going to be much harder for you to sort of find flaws in it and stuff like that, right? So then the process of you actually being accurately trying to represent the best version of what someone is arguing is going to be, hopefully, a process in which, more often than not, you're going to find out if you are the one in the echo chamber, or if you're actually trying to get someone out of it, right? So that might be a good way to sort of But that's probably why this would be a good technique, right? Because you have this discriminator that hopefully is independent of what you think, that would, help you figure out where you are.
Yeah.
Philip, Luke says you're a real atheology shill.
Yeah, I definitely am.
Kimmo raised an interesting point. The disconnect between coherent epistemology and an echo chamber was writ large for me when I served on a criminal jury. That's not saying a jury comprised of criminals, obviously. And that's interesting, actually. I've often wondered about that side of jury service. I've never done it. And wondered actually how many people really just want it to be over as quick as possible, and will go with the consensus because then it's done, because they don't care, because it's not their life, and it sort of forms a sort of echo chamber rather than it being a coherent epistemology, rational thought, actually critically thinking about the evidence presented. That's a really good point. So, Kimmo, I'd love to hear a bit more about it. There's probably not time to really chuck it into this stream, but if you want to send me a message on that, I'd love to hear about your experience with that, because it's, as I said, it's something I haven't experienced myself. So, very, very, very interested.
And I mean, it raises another good point that's sort of related to this as well. One way of thinking about echo chambers, and whether you're stuck in one, is forming a coherent epistemology for yourself. More than just no evidence, no believey.
Yeah, there has to be something a little bit more. I think that's a fair way to put it, though. A key indicator of something being an echo chamber is the fact that it doesn't have a coherent epistemology. As we mentioned, it operates on confirmation bias and circular reasoning and so on and so forth. You've got that whole in-group, out-group thing going on. It's a very tribal thing, and it's perfectly natural. I think
it's part of our psychology.
It is. It's definitely part of our psychology, and I think Steen even said something similar a while ago. It just wasn't right to bring it up, and that's the thing. And it's like I mentioned as well about how we have these biases, because imagine actually reanalyzing everything every single time, we wouldn't get anything done. We'd waste a hell of a lot of time. Luke says he wishes he'd joined this chat. Can we do another?
Yeah.
Of course we can. But next time you're gonna have to lead it. just to make sure that we don't cover off the same stuff. I wish you joined it too, Luke, but things with your missus. Damn you having a life.
Philosophy is more important than family.
Philosophy is family.
Sound culty as well.
No, we're not in a cult.
Though, to be fair, I mean, if people took a lot of the things we said in jest seriously, you could understand why they might think that we were.
Yeah, but we laugh a lot too, so...
Yeah, which is really distracting for people. I do apologise for the fact that we enjoy these conversations, have a laugh, and a general good time.
You shouldn't apologise for us enjoying these conversations.
We had one complaint. We had a complaint on YouTube that we laugh too much and joke around too much.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A long time ago.
We didn't change. We didn't change, but yeah. No, it's there was a bit of sarcasm in that apology. I'm not going to apologise for having a good time.
No.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up tonight?
Well, this. I know I promoted a lot.
Oh yeah, thinking fast and slow. That's on my wish list actually, and on Amazon it's less than $10 right now. So
nice. It's one of the. If you want to start thinking better, that's one of the most important books you can read.
In fact, I will grab a link for people and throw it in the chat right now, because I really, really, really want to get on this book. The only the Kindle edition is down to $6.99. If you don't have Audible, you can get it for free, but the paperback has gone up to £10.55.
I mean, that seems like a big deal.
Yeah, I very much intend to get this book at some point. I'm behind in my reading, and I haven't caught up. I think ever since Ivy's come along. I don't think I've really read much of anything other than the odd article on the blog.
Understandable.
But there you go. I've chucked that in the chat. But yes, Brina, I hope you've done a very good job on your apartment. I'll accept your word to say that you have, and I imagine it'll be a better job than I would do, me on my A game. So. And Luke says, I'm going to write a direct out of context quotes. In the echo chamber stream, Dave said philosophy is more important than family. I mean, he did slice it straight out of the video. There's plenty of tools that you can use to download it. There you go. You can make us just seem like awful bastards, and do it, because hate views are still views, right?
It's all engagement.
Kimmo says, I sentence you to be hanged by the neck until you cheer up. It's Monty Python's quote. But yes, check out that link there. I mean, obviously that's going to take you to Amazon UK, but that's the book, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and I definitely intend to get round to that. And as I mentioned, if you haven't had an Audible trial, you can get it as a free audiobook as well. So it's even better than spending $10. Depends how you feel about audiobooks, though. I must admit, I need the right author. I wish someone like Stephen Fry or someone like that could just narrate all books, because find, I mean, I love the Terry Pratchett books, right? I've read them all. I've read them all at least 3 times. But I on what's it called? On Audible, I started listening to the Terry Pratchett books, and I just couldn't. And then I started listening to a couple of others, and it was just, if they don't have the right voice, if they don't have the right engagement, it's just too painful to listen to someone else. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Cool. Well, I mean, I don't think I've got anything to add at this stage other than you've got your video on this topic going into a bit more detail about critical thinking and echo chambers. I mean, we've had quite a broad discussion, and you're going to have a bit more of a concise one that you're going to be releasing over the next few days, aren't you, Dave?
Yeah, with a slightly more provocative title.
As it should be. So keep your eyes peeled for that. For streams that we're planning to have in the future, there's that review of that video. What's the video called?
I can't remember. I just remember it being about how bad philosophy is.
Oh, that one. Oh, God, yes, that one.
Yeah, so
but I think Kevin wants to join in with that one, so got to kind of sort it out with him as well.
Yeah, so it'd be good to have Kevin back on the stream. I don't think we've had him on the stream since that Christmas superhero one that we did.
Yeah.
It's been almost a year since we've had Kevin on. So it'd be good to have him back on. He always has a slightly different take on things as well, so it's always interesting. So hopefully we've got that one coming up in the next few weeks. As for anything else, I mean, if anyone has any ideas or any requests, we're happy to do them. If you've got any videos that have come up that you'd like us to review, or any particular arguments or anything like that, or just asking us our general opinion, or if you want to come on and present something yourself, maybe teach us a little bit of something. I mean, there's plenty of topics that I'm ignorant about, and I'd love you to tell me a bit more about. So please do. Also, hopefully people have been enjoying me getting back into the mix in the last couple of streams. I apologize if you don't, but you're just going to have to deal with it.
It sets us apart.
So Alan actually has left a comment saying, I've only really learned from making mistakes and asking questions. And I think that's right. I think like making mistakes is one of the best ways to teach a lesson. As long as it's not too much of a serious mistake, it is definitely one of the best ways to learn something. I definitely agree with you there, Alan.
You shouldn't jump off bridges.
Yeah, sometimes you can learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
That's a good one as well, yeah.
Philip, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I didn't think so, but I really, really enjoyed this whole conversation.
I did. Thank you, guys.
A ton of fun, and I loved being back on stream and streaming with you guys. That was really good.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you.
Well, I mean, we're probably going to, at least for a while, stick to being a little bit later, starting at 9 instead of 8:30. I haven't changed the schedule on the video, so it is going to tell people we're going to be at 8:30, but it's going to be 9. Although I will be, when I can, mixing a bit early. But I do hope to have a lot more of these conversations and get back into a regular flow, and also get back to doing a few of the other little videos like the sci-fi shorts and stuff like that as well, because they're always quite fun, and it's nice to get a quick little video out there that explains something in terms that are hopefully simplistic enough to get the idea across and pique someone's interest to go, actually, I'd like to know a little bit more about this topic. Because the sci-fi shorts very rarely will ever be something that gives you detail. They're going to be very surface level, and I try my hardest to get them to 5 minutes, and most of the time they still end up going towards 10 minutes. Because these topics, even in their simplest form, are really hard to be really simple about. But I do enjoy doing them.
You've got one coming up that sort of links to the one that I'm doing at the moment with the I don't believe evolution, I accept evolution is true.
Yes, so I am planning on doing that one. So it's essentially going to be the article that
I'll be back in 2 seconds.
No worries.
Oh, no worries.
Essentially going to be like that article I posted on Answers in Reason about the difference between I don't believe and believe in and all that sort of stuff. I've also got one on the truth in morality. So it's a really quick overview of basically cognitivist and non-cognitivist moral theories, and just basically saying, in this one, the truth makers here, the truth makers here. Oh, there's no truth maker, but what it means is this. Here's an example. This is what it means. Here's an example. Trying not to put any of my bias in it, just literally trying to explain it in that sort of 1-2 line fashion, so that someone who likes to say morality is subjective but doesn't really understand much about morality can look at it and go, oh, okay, this particular subjective theory is what I actually think about morality, maybe look into it, but then also go, but actually there's a lot of different ones, so maybe I should look into those too. And if they're going to break out of their echo chamber, or at least engage their critical thinking skills, they will look at all these other topics. And I managed to tie it in.
Nice.
So anyway, thank you very much, everybody who has been watching tonight. All of you who've engaged in the chat have made me especially happy. Obviously, thank you, Philip, for coming back, and Dave, it's a pleasure as always. And,
nice one, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone catching the rerun, thank you as well. And please leave us a comment to let us know what you thought, or if you have any questions, or if you want us to address anything in the future. So you've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
I'm Philip.
Have a good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.